Today we're going to talk about if the 996 Carrera 4S is the car for you. Before I bought the cheapest Porsche 911 Carrera Coupe with under 100,000 miles on it that runs, drives, has a clean title in the United States, I considered a 987 Cayman S, a 996 Carrera 4S, and a 997. This time we're going to talk about the 996 Carrera 4S and talk about the pros and cons of it. This is part of a series of videos to help you decide which one was right for you of those models. I've already done one on the 996 Carrera Coupe and also of the 987 Cayman S. I'll link to those in the description, so check those out if you haven't seen them. Before we get started, with all the craziness going on in the world, I hope that you had a chance to get out and just enjoy your car and get some fresh sunlight and some fresh air, but while staying safe. And of course, driving is a great way to keep distance from people. I know for me, it doesn't feel like I've gotten out in the 911 enough, so I need to rectify that and get out and drive very soon. So here are the pros and cons, and actually we're going to do cons and pros of the 996 generation 911 Carrera 4S. Con number one, all-wheel drive maintenance. The all-wheel drive system is great, and that's why you get a Carrera 4 and a Carrera 4S, but it adds additional maintenance. There's a front differential, and things can go wrong. I've known other people who have had them, and it depends on how well you take care of it. Changing differential fluid and things of that nature is kind of important. But you tend to get issues, it seems like around 100,000 miles. There's lots of stuff on the internet that will talk about, other people's experience and what can go wrong in a 996 Carrera 4S with the all-wheel drive system. It's not a reason not to buy it. I guess it is a reason not to buy it. But it's just something to remember that it's an additional thing to maintain on the car. It's the same as getting, say, a turbo, where you have the turbocharger and everything that goes with that. And it's just additional stuff to maintain. Having said that, in a lot of cases, it's worth it. It's more work, going to cost more money. So, And here's con number two, the single row IMS bearing. Seems like we can't have a 996 conversation without talking about the dreaded IMS bearing. The 996 Carrera 4S is during the time period from 2002 to about 2004 where there was a single row IMS bearing that had a lower capacity. So the earlier cars had a dual row bearing, which tends to be a little bit less prone to failure. Not that it can't fail, but just less prone. The 996.2 cars, which the C4S is part of, they went with a lower load single row bearing. And when Porsche did that, it did increase the potential failure rate. It's not like these engines are going to just blow up left and right and like the internet would make you believe. If you read a lot of the things on the internet, every one of these 996s should be in a junkyard because the engine is just about to explode. But having the single row bearing does increase your chances of failure. Of course, there are aftermarket solutions. There's a whole cottage industry that's been built after this. The good thing is it's not a hard thing to fix, especially if you have a manual car. In a Tiptronic, it's a little bit more work because of how you have to remove stuff. But in a manual car, if you're getting your clutch replaced, it's a great time to replace your IMS bearing because everything's out and you can get right there. And as opposed to the 997.1, which also had an IMS bearing, and I believe it's starting in 2006, that their bearing went internal. It was a higher load bearing, but it's internal. So you have to open the case to replace it. With the 996.2, you don't have that issue. You can replace it without taking apart the engine. So, there's that. And there's an actual permanent solution. You can get solutions that are good for, 50,000 miles or 75,000 miles. And then they're just maintenance items. Or there are a couple oil-fed solutions that make it so you never have to worry about the IMS bearing ever. There are cars that have gone a lot of miles and not failed, but it's fairly cheap insurance just to make sure that you don't have an engine failure. When I say fairly cheap, the parts for the IMS bearing that is an oil-fed bearing do tend to run about $1,500. So It's not cheap, talking $2,500 probably with it if you pay a shop to have it installed, and depending on what other work you get done at the same time. So it's not cheap, but then who said owning a 911 would ever be cheap? But relatively speaking, it is cheaper than buying a brand new engine. And if you are looking at buying a 996.2 in general, and you find out that the IMS bearing has not been replaced, it's a very good bargaining chip. You can either decide to walk away and find one that it's been replaced, or you can use that as a way to lower the price so that you pay a couple thousand less, and then that gives you the money to go get it replaced. And here's con number 3, bore scoring. Now, bore scoring can affect any of these 996, 911s, and even 997s. In fact, it affects more of the 997, especially the Carrera S. Now, the earlier 3.4 liter engines, like what's behind me, those tend to have a little less issue because there's a smaller bore. And with the 3.6 liter engines that are in the 996.2s, which is the case in the C4S, they tend to have a slightly higher percentage chance of bore scoring. Not saying that any other ones can't get bore scoring, they all can. There aren't really warning signs other than taking a bore scope up into it. So basically you're sticking a camera up into your engine and seeing if it looks like any scoring has already occurred. There's not really preventative maintenance, but you can check if the engine has it, and you can develop it pretty much at any time. So you just never know about that. There are things that can be done if you get it, and I guess there is some preventative stuff because you could do what could be done. But basically it's replacing the cylinder liners, and there are solutions for that. But it does require you to disassemble the engine, and basically you're doing a rebuild at that point. If you're looking at a car and you don't have a bore scope, I mean, obviously get a pre-purchase inspection is the best thing to do, and then you can have someone go up there with a bore scope and just double check that there's no bore scoring. One of the things to listen to if you're first looking at a car to decide is it even worth having a pre-purchase inspection is like a tick that doesn't go away. So these cars do tend to tick. It's usually like a chain rattle because the oil hasn't got fed or things of that nature, but that ticking should go away. That ticking should not stay. Once the car kind of warms up and you're driving, you shouldn't keep hearing because what you're getting is piston slap. Because of the rubbing away of the lining from the bore scoring, the piston head is able to move. Eventually it will be really bad in your engine. You can still drive these cars for a bit, but it's best to get it fixed. So it's not like they can't start, they can't drive, but it's not something you want to keep, and you're just not going to have your engine running its best anyway. And if you want a performance car, you want it running its best no matter what. And long term, you'll probably do more damage if you continue to drive it with the issue. So you'll end up having to get it rebuilt. I have heard of a few people doing things with like seafoam and things like that. I don't know if it actually fixed the issue at all or if it just kind of masks it. But there are a few stories like that. So I guess if you're getting the ticking, you could try it, but you're just delaying the inevitable, and you'll probably have to get a rebuild later. And because of that, if you're looking to buy a 996 in general or a 997, a pre-purchase inspection is key. It's worth a couple $100 that it's going to cost you. Just, you got to be serious about buying the car. But if you're serious about buying this car, it's worth a couple $100 to get that pre-purchase inspection, because someone can go in and look and see if bore scoring is happening. So what if someone did something like put a can of seafoam in there just before you got in and it did just enough to make the sound go away? So that's enough with the cons, why you shouldn't buy it, Let's get to the fun stuff. Let's get to the pros. This is why you should buy a 996 Carrera 4S. Pro number 1, the all-wheel drive system. So yes, it was a con for the maintenance, but the all-wheel drive system is great, especially if you want to do sporty driving in slick conditions. You just can't do a lot of that kind of stuff. If you live in a climate that gets cold And maybe you don't want to drive your 911 all the time, but you want the option to drive it in the snow. Yes, the two-wheel drive, because of the weight being on the back end, does keep a lot of traction even in slick conditions. The all-wheel drive will just keep you out of a lot more trouble. You just won't have to worry as much about the ice. I mean, you've got fairly slick tires if you got summer tires, so you got to make sure your tires are correct. And another advantage going along with that all-wheel drive system that works together with that is your sports suspension. So with the Carrera 4S, you get a more sporty setup. So it doesn't provide, a super harsh ride like you might, but it's a little bit more firm. Not so much that it's not comfortable to ride in, and it's great. I mean, it's a sports car, so you want a sports suspension is a good thing. So versus a 996.2 normal Carrera, like a Carrera 2S or even a Carrera 4, you're going to get a little bit better suspension. You get the brakes off of a 911 turbo, so you're going to have better stopping power. So especially if you want to track the car, you're going to get a little bit better performance just because of that. You'll go into corners and it'll be a little bit more flat. You're going to be able to stop a little bit faster. So it gives you some advantages there. In the real world, when you're cruising, the amount of harshness isn't so bad that it's like, oh, that is practically like the difference between a GT3 RS, which is a lot harsher on the road than, say, a regular 911 Carrera. But it does give a little bit more of a sporting feel to the car as opposed to a regular 911. And here's pro number 2, the added torque from a 3.6 liter engine, as opposed to say a 996.1 where you have the 3.4 liter. With the 3.6 liter engine that comes in the Carrera 4S and all the 996.2s, you do get more torque. You also get more horsepower, but the torque curve moves down. And because in the 996.1, all of your power is way up at the top end, with the 996.2, the 3.6 liter engines, you have more torque lower down. For regular driving, when you're not on the track and you're just going all out, for regular driving, it feels like these engines have a lot more power than the 3.4s. And that's because you're not having to rev them out as much to get a lot of that torque. They still are fun to rev out, but it's not as required to get every ounce of performance from the engine. Going along with that 3.6 liter engine, in the 996.2s in general, you also have a different gear ratio than the 996.1s. So if you go for a manual, 4th, 5th, and 6th gear have different ratios than the 996.1, which makes sense. You've got a different engine, you've got different amount of power to supply. Same top speed. So some of the gear you may just be to keep your top speed the same. Now a 996.2 Carrera 2 versus Carrera 4, Carrera 4S, those gear ratios are the same. If you go for a manual, they're all the same. If you go for a Tiptronic, they're all the same. So you're not getting added from a 996 perspective, but if you go from a 996.1, which is what I was considering, versus the 996.2 Carrera 4S, the gear ratios are different between those generations. And here's pro number 3, the turbo look. This is probably the biggest reason why someone would get the 996 Carrera 4S. You get the wide body look that you would get in turbo. You get, of course, the 996.2s have the turbo lights, but you get the front bumper, that's the same as the turbo. You get the rear diffuser, that's the same as the turbo, except there's things that block some of the air going through parts of things that don't need air going through them because you don't have turbochargers. And you get one other styling element that the turbo doesn't even have. You get the light bar on the back, which has become kind of more common on the newer ones, but in the 996s and even some of the older ones, having that light bar was not standard. So if you get a regular Carrera 4 or a regular Carrera, you don't get a light bar that connects your back lights. But in the 4S, you do. And it really does make the back end of the Carrera 4S stand out. So people know it's not just another 996. Oh, well, people that know Porsches will know it's not just regular 996. Other people will just think you've got just some 911 because most people can't tell the difference. But with prices of the turbos getting so crazy high, getting that turbo look in the 911 996 Carrera 4S, you can get it for considerably less money than you would get in a turbo model. Yes, the performance isn't as high. You get the same looks, you get the suspension upgrades, you get the bigger brakes, you get a lot of the things that you get in the 996 turbo, just without the turbo, which, yeah, you get a little less power, but on the road, it's not like you can always use all that turbo power. And you get a very nice, naturally aspirated car, which there is something to be said about that, especially with everything going turbo these days. And on top of all that, you don't have the added maintenance of the turbochargers. So the one bad thing of the 996 turbo is you've got added maintenance with the turbochargers. I mean, it's a Metzger engine, so they're very good engines, but there is additional maintenance that you have to do with a turbocharged car. They also have hoses that tend to like to break off, but there's a fix for that. You know, every car has its pluses and minuses, and no matter what, I mean, they're designed by humans, so things are bound to not be perfect, but more or less the turbos are bulletproof. With the IMS bearing and the RMS, you can take care of all that kind of stuff. The standard, we know what will usually go wrong in these 996s, and for a relatively low amount of money, you can take care of it, and then you have a very dependable, fun to drive car that in its day was over $80,000 to purchase. So the 996 Carrera 4S is a very desirable car. The turbo look, the wide body, you know, a lot of people would like this car over other 996s. Not quite as desirable as the turbo, but you're kind of like the next level down from there. And it's still quite a bargain. I've seen a number of decent ones on sale for under $30,000. So that's a lot of car for the money. So the great thing is you get the turbo styling in a much more affordable package. And who wouldn't want that? So thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. If you have a Carrera 4S, hey, get down in the comments, tell us what you like about it, what you don't like about it. Did I get everything wrong, which is very possible. You know, I'm just some guy on the internet. I'm not an automotive expert, I just play one on YouTube. And if you haven't already subscribed, what are you waiting for? You made it to the end of this video, so you either enjoyed it at least a little bit, or you're a glutton for punishment. If you subscribe now, a donation will be made in your name to the Buy a Middle-Aged Man a 918 Spider Fund. His name's David, and that car will be in my garage right next to the cheapest Porsche 911 Carrera coupe in the USA. And as always, if you're one of my regular viewers, thanks so much. You guys really do make this all possible and fun. Now, the only thing left to say is get out there and drive. And hey, I'll be down in the comments, so if you guys want to talk, hey, hit me up down there.